Nobody expected the Duke of Rothwell to ruin his own betrothal announcement. Everyone had assumed if ruin came that evening, it would arrive for someone else, and certainly not delivered by the bridegroom himself, smiling, glass raised. Jane Marlowe stood at his side in ivory silk, chosen to match a future she had been promised since March, and watched Marcus Aldrich, Duke of Rothwell, lift his glass toward a woman who was not her. The ballroom of the Mayfair townhouse had gone quiet the way rooms go quiet, when everyone senses a mistake being made in real time and no one moves to stop it. Marcus. He did not look at her. He looked at Lady Cordelia Fenwick, standing 3 feet from the betrothal table in blue silk, far too fine for a widow of modest means, and he said the words London would repeat by morning. To health, he said. To the health of those who make a household worth returning to. He never said her name. He did not need to. Every eye in the room understood whose health he toasted and whose he had not. Jane's father, Edward Marlowe, went the color of old parchment 3 tables away, because he alone understood what this marriage had been meant to repair, and what its collapse stood to cost. Grangeford, their home in Wiltshire, carried a mortgage this match was meant to retire without fuss. Edward had never told his daughter the sum owed. He had let her believe the wedding was about happiness.
I must follow.
Near the doors, half in shadow, because he had learned long ago that a solicitor stands better in shadow at a duke's ball than in the light, Thomas Wycliffe watched Jane's face and understood, before she did, that something in her had just finished breaking. He had known Jane Marlowe for 11 years. He had drawn up her father's leases, walked her father's boundary lines, and said almost nothing to her in all that time, because there was nothing a land agent's son could say to an earl's granddaughter. Tonight, watching her stand alone in front of 300 witnesses while the man she was to marry toasted his mistress, Thomas found he no longer cared what was owed to proper manners. Jane set down her own glass without drinking. She did not weep. She did not raise her voice. She turned, walked the length of the ballroom at a pace that dared anyone to stop her, and stepped out into the cold of the terrace. Say something. Anyone. Nobody followed her out except Thomas Wycliffe, who had never once in his life been invited to follow her anywhere, and who did so now without asking whether he ought.
The wind's changed. You'll want a shawl before you take a chill on top of everything else.
You're the land agent, Wycliffe.
I have that misfortune. Yes.
She laughed once, a short broken sound with no humor in it, and pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes as if she could push the whole evening back inside her skull. He toasted her. In front of my father, in front of the vicar who was meant to marry us in 11 days.
I saw.
Everyone saw. That was the design of it, I think. He could have humiliated me alone, in a room where I might have wept in peace. He chose the largest audience London had to offer instead. Thomas said nothing for a moment, because the truth sitting behind his teeth was larger and older than tonight's cruelty, and he had carried it for 6 years out of a caution that suddenly felt like cowardice.
Miss Marlowe, there is a reason I have never much cared for the Duke of Rothwell beyond tonight's performance, and it predates your engagement by some years.
Everyone in 3 counties dislikes him for some reason or another. Join the crowd.
Mine is not a matter of temperament. It is a matter of paper.
Something in his voice made her lower her hand and look at him for what she would later realize was the first true look she had ever given him in over a decade. What sort of paper?
The kind that, read by the right commissioners, would end considerably more than a wedding.
Behind them, through the terrace doors, the orchestra took up its tune again as though nothing at all had happened, because in a room built on appearances, continuing was the only apology anyone meant to offer. The carriage ride home from Mayfair passed in near silence, Jane's satin skirts crushed against the seat, her father sitting across from her with his hat in his lap like a man holding the one thing he still had control over. Edward said he would call on the Duke tomorrow, that this could be mended, a public word, a correction. Men had survived worse foolishness than a toast. You mean to ask him to apologize for his mistress in front of the same 300 people who watched him honor her? Do you truly believe he would agree, Father? Or that I would want him to? Edward's hands tightened on the brim of his hat, and for a long moment he said nothing, watching the dark hedgerows slide past the carriage window. He said, "Granchford cannot survive the loss of this match, and I have never known how to tell you that without sounding as though your happiness matters to me less than the roof over your head. Then tell me now, plainly, what does the match hold up that I have never been told the shape of?" He looked at his own hands instead of at her, and admitted, for the first time aloud, that the estate carried a debt old enough that he had stopped believing it would ever come due. 9 years now, he said, a misfortune with the grazing income, more complicated than he had ever explained to her. A father did not enjoy telling his daughter he had built her future on ground that shifted under him. Jane watched him in the dim carriage light and understood, for the first time, that her father's quiet these past years had never been temperament. It had been shame he did not know how to carry any lighter. "We will find another way, Father. I do not yet know what it is, but I will not marry a man who toasted another woman at my own betrothal to buy us out of a debt neither of us fully understands." Jane Marlowe had grown up understanding certain rules without ever being told them outright, the way a fish understands water. A well-married daughter mended a family's fortune. A daughter sent home unmarried, jilted before the whole of London, mended nothing at all. Her father's debts were not scandalous by the standards of the county. Half the gentry in Wiltshire carried some version of the same weight. But Granchford's particular ruin traced back 9 years to a season when the common grazing feeding half the estate's income was redrawn on paper alone. He had borrowed against grazing rights that, within 18 months, no longer existed anywhere but in memory. He had never fully explained why. Jane had grown up believing it was simple misfortune, a bad harvest compounded by worse luck. Thomas Wycliffe knew otherwise, because Thomas Wycliffe had been the junior surveyor sent to walk that same boundary in the year it happened, before he was anyone at all. Before his own modest independence had been built one careful client at a time out of the ruins of that season. He had been ordered by the old Duke's steward to certify a boundary line that did not match his own measurements. He refused. He was dismissed within the week, without fuss, because a duke's household does not announce its own dishonesty. What he had not been permitted to do was correct the record. The false line stood. 3 tenant families lost common rights that had fed their herds for generations, among them the Hallidays of Combe, whose grazing land became on paper Rothwell Chase's private park. Edward Marlowe's guarantee, tied to income from land he believed still carried common rights, collapsed within the year. He never connected the two events aloud. He grew older and more careful with money, the way ruined men often do without ever naming what ruined them. Thomas had kept his own original survey folded inside a strongbox in his office for 6 years, waiting for a use he had never found the nerve to claim, because the truth alone, spoken by a land agent's son against a duke, would have been dismissed before it was heard. Tonight, watching Jane Marlowe stand outside a ballroom with nothing left to lose that had not already been taken from her in front of witnesses, Thomas understood the survey had found its moment at last. "You've gone very quiet, Mr. Wycliffe."
I'm deciding how much of the truth you can bear tonight, on top of everything else, and how much would only be cruelty dressed as honesty.
"I have just watched my betrothed toast his mistress in front of the vicar. I believe I have some capacity left for truth," he told her, standing on a cold terrace in borrowed candlelight about the boundary line, the false survey, and the 9-year-old wound that had bled her father's fortune while everyone called it bad luck. Jane listened without interrupting, her hands gripping the stone balustrade until her knuckles went pale, and when he finished she said nothing for a long moment, watching her own breath cloud and vanish in the cold air. "You're telling me the man I was to marry did more than humiliate me tonight. He has been ruining my family for 9 years, and I never knew his name attached to any of it until this moment."
That is what I'm telling you, yes.
"Then marry me." The words left her before she had finished deciding whether she meant them, which was, Thomas would later think, precisely why he believed them.
Miss Marlowe?
Not out of sentiment, out of arithmetic. You hold proof that could unmake his standing before every commissioner and every drawing room from here to Bath. I hold a name he humiliated tonight, in front of 300 witnesses who will talk for a month regardless of what I do next. If I marry you within the fortnight, before he can arrange any account of tonight that flatters him, the story becomes mine to tell, not his. And you will have a reason the world will accept for bringing that survey forward at last.
You would be marrying a land agent's son, not a duke. Not even a gentleman by half the drawing room's reckoning.
I have just watched what a duke's honor is worth at close range. I find I am no longer impressed by the title. Thomas studied her for a long moment, searching her face for the panic he expected, and finding instead something colder and steadier that frightened him slightly more.
You do not know what you're offering me the chance to do.
Then tell me plainly instead of in riddles, because I am cold and I'm done with men who speak around the truth instead of through it.
I'm offering to put 6 years of silence to some use other than protecting my own comfort. The survey was never kept with marriage in mind, Miss Marlowe. I kept it because I could never find the nerve to use it alone.
The wind caught the hem of her ivory silk, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the party's music still drifting through the glass behind them, like a world that had already moved on without either of them in it. Then let us find that nerve together, Mr. Wycliffe. Alone. We are both just people the Duke of Rothwell has ruined. Together, we might be something he cannot so easily set aside. He held out his hand, not as a suitor, but as a man extending the one honest thing he had left to offer, and Jane Marlowe, still in the dress chosen for a different wedding, took it. A special license, bought with the last of Thomas's careful savings, married them 9 days later in a small chapel outside Combe, with Edward Marlowe standing witness, pale and silent, understanding by then exactly what his daughter intended, and too proud or too grateful to forbid it. London talked for as long as London ever talks about anything, which was long enough that the Duke of Rothwell, arriving at his club 3 days after the wedding notice appeared, found himself, for the first time in his adult life, laughed at rather than deferred to. Before we return to Grangerford, tell me something small. Is it warm where you are tonight, or has the cold already found you the way it found Jane on that terrace? A story lands differently depending on the weather outside the window. Thomas Wycliffe's house sat at the edge of Combe, a solid stone building with none of Rothwell Chase's marble and twice its warmth, heated by fires lit because someone wished to be comfortable, not because a room required staging for guests. Jane arrived with 2 trunks and a maid lent by her father, and found, to her own surprise, that the strangeness of her new life had less to do with reduced circumstances than with how little pretending was required inside it.
The study is through there. I would ask you not to move the papers on the left side of the desk, not because they are secret from you now, but because I have a system that only I understand.
A man with a system. I confess, I did not expect that from a land agent.
You expected mud on my boots and little else? Most people do.
I expected nothing at all, Mr. Wycliffe, because until 9 days ago I had scarcely thought of you as a man with rooms of his own, let alone a system for keeping them. He showed her the survey that evening, spreading the true boundary map across the study table beside the false one recorded at the county office, and Jane traced the difference between the 2 lines with one gloved finger. This strip here, that was the Halliday grazing.
It was. Josiah Halliday still farms what remains of his holding 3 fields instead of the 11 his father worked, and still speaks of the old Duke's steward the way other men speak of a fever they nearly died of.
Then we go to him. If this is to mean anything before a commissioner, it needs a living voice attached to it, not 2 maps that only disagree on paper. A message came from Grangerford the following afternoon that Lady Cordelia Fenwick had called at the house, asking to speak with Jane directly, and would not be turned away without an answer. Jane received her in the small front parlor, the 2 women alone, Cordelia's fine blue traveling cloak dripping onto Edward's worn carpet, her face carrying none of the triumph Jane had braced herself to see. She said she had not come to gloat, whatever Jane believed of her. She had come because she owed Jane a truth the Duke would never trouble himself to give. I would have thought you owed me nothing at all, given the position you now hold. Cordelia said she held no position at all, only a widow's small annuity and a large debt to a man who had made it very clear, the week before the ball, that he meant to keep her visible enough to end the engagement without ever raising his voice to do it. Jane stared at her, the shape of the evening rearranging itself in her mind. The toast she had spent a fortnight believing was cruelty aimed at her now looking instead like a weapon aimed at someone else altogether.
You are telling me he used you. That the toast was never truly about me at all.
Cordelia said the Duke of Rothwell had never in his life done a cruel thing that did not also serve him twice over. He had wished to be free of an engagement grown inconvenient, and he had wished the world to believe the choice was romance rather than arithmetic.
Inconvenient how?
A better offer had arrived from the north a month before the wedding. Cordelia told her an heiress with land bordering his own, a title that needed no fraud to secure a fortune. Jane, it seemed, was no longer worth the price of keeping. Cordelia left as she had come without triumph, and Jane stood a long while at the parlor window watching the carriage go, understanding that her own humiliation had been from the start a smaller matter to Marcus Aldrich than she had ever allowed herself to believe. Combe sat 6 miles from Grangerford across country roads that had not seen proper repair in a decade, and the morning Jane and Thomas set out for it. Low gray clouds sat over the valley like a lid pressed down on a pot already near boiling. The rain found them within the hour, sudden and hard, turning the lane to churned mud that swallowed the carriage wheel to the axle a mile short of the village, leaving them no choice but to abandon the vehicle and continue on foot through the worst of it. They reached an empty drover's shelter at the top of the lane, little more than 3 stone walls and a slate roof, and stood inside it dripping and breathless while the storm hammered the world outside into a gray blur.
I have ruined a second gown for your cause in as many weeks, Mr. Wycliffe. At this rate, I shall arrive at the commissioner's hearing in a farmer's smock.
I would testify to your resolve regardless of what you wore, though I confess the smock would make an interesting addition to the county's memory of the affair.
She laughed, a real laugh this time, the sound surprising her as much as it did him, and for a moment the cold and the mud and the 9 days of upheaval fell out of reach altogether.
You are not at all what I assumed. These 11 years I scarcely looked at you.
What did you assume?
That you were careful, quiet, a man who measured land and said little else. I did not think you kind enough to keep a family's ruin folded in a strongbox for 6 years, waiting for a chance to make it right instead of burying it and getting on with your own comfortable life.
I very nearly did bury it, Jane. I'm not owed credit for courage I found only when it became convenient to find it.
Perhaps not, but you found it. Most men, given 6 years and a comfortable excuse, never do.
She reached out and brushed a strand of wet hair from his forehead without quite deciding to, and he went very still under her hand, the rain loud against the slate above them, neither of them moving to close the last small distance between their bodies.
If I kiss you now in a drover's shelter with mud to my knees, I want it understood it is not gratitude for a convenient arrangement. I have wanted to for longer than either of us should probably admit in polite company.
Then stop asking permission and do it, Thomas, before I lose my nerve and pretend I did not just say that aloud.
He kissed her there, in the gray light and the noise of rain on slate, and it was nothing like the cold formality of a ballroom betrothal, and everything like the beginning of something neither of them had planned but both, it turned out, had wanted for a long while. Josiah Halliday, when they reached him past noon, mud-streaked and soaked through, listened to their request with the particular stillness of a man who has waited a long time to be asked a question he had given up expecting. He asked, in a flat voice, whether they wanted him to stand up before commissioners and county gentlemen and say the old Duke's steward had lied about his father's boundary.
I want you to tell the truth, Josiah. I will stand beside you when you do.
The old farmer studied them both for a long moment, the true survey spread across his kitchen table, beside a cup of tea gone cold, and something in his weathered face loosened for the first time in longer than either of them could guess. His father, he said, had died still believing it was his own mismeasure that cost them the grazing, never knowing it was theft with a signature attached. He would very much like the chance to correct that, he said, before he followed him. Word of the survey reached Rothwell Chase within a week, because Wiltshire kept few secrets longer than that, and the Duke of Rothwell, unused to being threatened by anyone beneath the rank of an earl, chose to handle the matter himself. He arrived at Thomas's office in Combe on a Tuesday morning, alone, dressed with the particular carelessness of a man who wished to appear untroubled while being, in fact, deeply troubled. He said, "Wycliffe, I understand you have developed an interest in old paperwork."
I have developed an interest in accurate paperwork, Your Grace. There is a difference, though I understand it may be unfamiliar to your household.
The Duke said his father's steward had drawn that boundary 11 years ago, and whatever error Thomas believed he had found belonged to a dead man's clerk, not to him.
The steward drew it on instruction, Your Grace, and the income from it has fed your household every year since, including the years you have overseen the estate with your own hand. A debt does not become innocent because someone else incurred it first.
The Duke's jaw tightened, and for a moment something colder than irritation moved behind his eyes, the look of a man weighing how much damage a land agent's son could truly do him. He said, "Name a sum, Wycliffe. Whatever figure you imagine that survey is worth to you, I will double it, and you will find some reason to remember your measurements less clearly."
There is no sum, Your Grace. I have spent 6 years watching what your family's silence cost mine, and I find I have grown rather attached to the truth in its unpurposed state.
The Duke said Jane's father owed considerably more to his family's bank than either of them seemed to remember, and that he could call that note within the month, and leave Grangeford to the creditors regardless of what old maps Thomas waved before a commissioner.
You could, and I would still present the survey the following morning with Josiah Halliday standing beside me, because ruining my father-in-law does not unforge a boundary line, Your Grace. It only proves once more the sort of man you are.
The Duke left without another word, the carriage wheels cutting deep furrows into the wet lane as he departed. And Thomas stood in his own doorway a long moment afterward, hands unsteady in a way he was careful not to let Jane see when she came to find him. 2 days later, word reached Combe that the note against Grangeford had, in fact, been called, and Edward Marlowe arrived at Thomas's door pale, and shaking with a letter demanding full repayment within the month or forfeiture of the estate itself. He said he should never have let her go through with this, that he had cost his daughter a duke's protection and now, it seemed, her family's roof as well.
"You have cost me nothing, father." He did that himself, at a ball in front of 300 witnesses, before I ever spoke a word to Thomas.
Jane sat with her father's letter in her lap that night, reading the figure demanded again and again as though repetition might change it, while beside her Thomas worked through columns of his own modest accounts by candlelight with the particular grimness of a man doing arithmetic he already suspects will not favor him.
I cannot cover the full note. Not without selling holdings I have spent 6 years building carefully enough that nothing about them could ever be questioned.
Then we do not cover it with money we do not have. We cover it with the one thing he cannot buy back from us now.
The survey.
The commissioners sit again within the week if we petition for an urgent review. If we bring the survey before them before the note comes due, his own fraud becomes the thing everyone speaks of, not my father's debt. A ruined duke makes a poor creditor to press anyone for anything.
They rode for the county seat the next morning, Thomas's true survey wrapped carefully in oilcloth against the weather, Josiah Halliday beside them in his one good coat, all three of them carrying, in their separate ways, 9 years of quiet cost toward a single room where it might at last be weighed. The commissioner's hall and devises was neither grand nor especially large, a plain room of dark wood and tall windows, but it filled that morning with more spectators than any enclosure review in memory, because word had traveled that a duke's honesty stood questioned by a land agent and an old farmer. The Duke of Rothwell arrived with his own solicitor, a sharp London man who opened by declaring the presented survey a forgery, drawn recently and falsely dated, designed by a bitter former employee to extract money from a family he envied. The Duke added that his father's steward was 11 years dead and could not defend himself against accusations invented at a timing that suited Thomas's new wife rather neatly, whose own father required his debt forgiven. A murmur moved through the room, and for one long moment Jane felt the whole morning tilt toward disaster, the truth suddenly fragile against the sheer confidence of a duke's certainty. The duke's solicitor pressed further, turning to Josiah with the practiced ease of a London man who had broken weaker witnesses than an old Wiltshire farmer. He said the board could hardly weigh a boyhood memory against a document bearing an official seal, that memory fades where paper does not. Josiah answered, "Paper does not fade, no. But paper can be made to lie by a steady enough hand. A boy who walks the same stones with his father every spring for 11 years does not forget where they stood." The solicitor pressed him on dates, on distances, on the precise words the old steward had used, circling for any crack in the old man's account. For a long stretch of minutes the hall held its breath while Josiah answered each question without once raising his voice or losing the thread of what he knew to be true. Then Josiah Halliday rose, unbidden, his old knees protesting the movement, and asked the commissioners leave to speak, which was granted more out of surprise than expectation that a farmer's testimony could matter against a duke's solicitor. He said, "I walked that boundary myself as a boy beside my father, before ever a new survey was drawn. I know every stone of it, the way I know my own hands. This map before you matches what I walked. The county's official record does not, and never did." He went on, "I have said nothing for 11 years because no one asked, and because I believed, as my father did, that men like us are not believed against men like him. Mr. Wycliffe is the first person in 11 years who thought my memory worth writing down." The room went very quiet. The particular quiet of people realizing a story they had assumed settled was, in fact, still bleeding. And the chief commissioner, an elderly man with little patience left for London solicitors, asked to examine both surveys side by side. What followed took the better part of an hour. Measurements checked against parish records, boundary stones located and confirmed against Thomas's original notation, until even the Duke's own solicitor fell silent, unable to argue against a fraud documented in Thomas's careful, dated, unbroken hand. The chief commissioner set down his pen at last and looked at the Duke of Rothwell, who stood very still, the confidence gone from his face altogether. He said, "I have sat on this board for 19 years, Your Grace, and I have rarely seen a matter so cleanly proven. The original boundary would stand restored, effective that day, to the Halliday holding and the 2 other families affected, and he would be recommending a full review of every enclosure award signed under the late Duke's steward." The Duke said nothing. There was, for perhaps the first time in his entire life, nothing left to say that would not confirm what the whole room had just watched proven against him. Jane stood at the back of the hall beside her husband, watching the man who had once toasted his mistress at her own betrothal dinner stand now with no toast left to offer anyone, and found she felt mostly tired rather than triumphant.
It is strange. I thought I would feel something larger than this.
Justice rarely feels the way vengeance promised it would. It feels more like a weight set down at last.
Outside the hall, Josiah Halliday gripped Thomas's hand with both of his own, unable to manage words for a moment, and Edward Marlowe, standing a little apart, watched his daughter with an expression that had not settled on his face in 9 long years. He said her mother would have liked him. He measured a man the same careful way he measured a boundary. Slow, honest, until the true line showed itself.
She would have liked that he never once asked to be thanked for 6 years of silence, only forgiven for taking so long to break it.
The weeks that followed carried their own smaller reckonings. Cordelia Fenwick, freed at last from a household that had only ever wanted her visible, took a cottage near Bath on the last of her annuity. She sent Jane a single letter, thanking her for a truth she had never expected a jilted bride to receive kindly. The Halliday holding, boundary restored on paper, and soon after, in fact, saw its first full season of grazing in over a decade, and Josiah Halliday walked the old line himself every morning that autumn, as though checking that the stones meant to stay put this time. The Duke of Rothwell resigned his seat on the county bench within the month, quietly enough that only Wiltshire noticed, and no announcement of a northern heiress ever followed the collapse of his reputation. On the ride back from Devizes, Jane sat across from her husband in a hired carriage that smelled of damp wool and old leather, watching him stare out at hedgerows he had likely walked 100 times before. She found herself asking a question she had been circling for days without the nerve to land on it.
When you offered your hand that night on the terrace, was any part of it truly for me, Thomas? Or was I only the shape your courage found convenient to wear?
I have asked myself the same question more nights than I would like to admit, and I have never once found an answer that let me off easily. I wanted to use the survey for 6 years and lacked the nerve alone. That much is true. But I did not fall in love with you 6 years ago because I needed a reason to be brave, Jane. I fell in love with you long before I had any use for you at all.
You never once said so. In 11 years, not a word.
What word was there to say? You were promised to a duke before I ever worked up the courage to look at you directly across your father's dining table. A land agent does not declare himself to an earl's granddaughter and expect anything but pity in return.
Jane was quiet for a long moment, watching the hedgerows give way to the first low roofs of Combe, weighing a truth of her own she had not fully admitted even to herself until the words were already forming.
I married you for arithmetic, Thomas. I told myself that for 9 days, and I believed it for perhaps 3 of them. By the time we stood in that drover's shelter, it was no longer arithmetic at all, and I think some part of me knew it before I let myself say so aloud.
What changed it?
Watching you refuse the Duke's bribe without a moment's hesitation, when a smaller man would have taken the money and called it justice enough. I have spent my whole life among men who measure their honor by how well it photographs in a ballroom. You measure yours by what you do when no one but an old farmer and a frightened wife is watching.
Thomas reached across the narrow space between the carriage seats and took her hand, not as a man extending an offer this time, but as one confirming something already settled between them.
Then let me say it properly once, the way I should have said it 11 years ago at your father's table, before either of us had any arithmetic to hide behind. I love you, Jane Marlowe. I have for longer than I can rightly account for.
I love you as well, Thomas Wycliffe. I did not expect to, and I have never been more grateful to be wrong about anything in my life.
That evening back at Combe, with the fire lit and the true survey folded away for good, no longer a weapon but a record set right, Jane found Thomas standing at the study window, watching rain that had softened at last into something gentler than the storm that first brought them together.
You never did finish what you started in that drover's shelter, the right way, without mud to your knees, and a farmer waiting on the far side of the field.
I was rather hoping you had forgotten that part.
I remember every part, Thomas. I intend to remember it for a very long time.
He crossed the room and kissed her again, unhurried this time. No storm pressing them forward, no ruined ball behind them, and no hearing ahead. Only 2 people who had married for arithmetic and found, somewhere between a stolen boundary and a farmer's cold cup of tea, that they had married for something far better. I once knew a woman who kept a small brass compass on her mantle her whole life, though she never once used it for travel. Her name was, I want to say, Margaret? No. Marianne? Yes, Marianne. That was it. She told me once that her own grandmother had carried it through a season of ruin not unlike Jane's, and that it never once pointed anywhere she expected, only toward whoever happened to be standing steady beside her when the storm finally broke. I think of that compass now, listening to Jane and Thomas find their true line at last, boundary restored, family repaired, love arriving not instead of justice but folded inside it, unannounced. Tell me, if you would, has there ever been a person in your own life who turned out steadier than you expected, someone you underestimated for years before you looked at them the way they deserved? I would very much like to hear about them in the comments whenever you have a moment to write it down.